Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this, the Bradlaugh Lecture, our first in-person event since, when was it, March 2020, when lockdown kicked in. So thanks for coming out today. It's absolutely lovely to have everyone in a room together. I'm Stephen Adams, I'm the Chief Executive of the National Secular Society. So for the uninitiated, Bradlaugh was the founder of the National Secular Society over 150 years ago. Today, the NSS champions a free, fair, tolerant, open, inclusive, secular state where everyone's human rights are properly balanced, so no one's either advantaged or disadvantaged on account of their beliefs or indeed other people's beliefs. Bradlaugh was very much disadvantaged on account of other people's beliefs and his own beliefs, despite being elected not once but 4 times by the people of Northampton. Bradlaugh was refused permission to take the religious oath that was required of MPs on account of his atheism, and therefore he was denied his seat in Parliament. For more than 5 years, he fought for the right to take his seat. Eventually, the Speaker relented, and when he was elected as backbencher, it was his Oaths Act in 1888 which extended the right of non-religious MPs to affirm rather than swear a religious oath, which is, of course, a right that's enjoyed by many MPs to this day. In case you missed it on the way in, there is a magnificent painting of Bradlaugh outside the room in the atrium of the gallery. It's Bradlaugh standing in the House of Commons, at the bar of the House of Commons. It's painted by Walter Sickert. It hangs in the atrium, as I say. It was gifted to the gallery by the Manchester branch of the National Secular Society back in 1911. So we were happy to work with the gallery some years ago. It was found in the basement. We dusted it down, we restored it, and worked with the gallery to get it rehung. So if you haven't seen it yet, please do enjoy it on the way out. Now, the biography of Charles Bradlaugh by Brian Miller is entitled Dare to Stand Alone, which is perhaps the title that would work for the biography of today's speaker, Nazir Afzal. Although I feel that would probably not do justice to the many brave individuals and the NGOs that have worked with Nazir over the years to bring justice to those who were once ignored. But without doubt, Nazir has dared to stand alone on many occasions, to put his head above the parapet, not only to say but also do the right thing. He's always done what was right, despite it not always being popular with others and those around him. Indeed, Nazir's public announcements on the Danish Mohammed cartoons controversy earned him a place on the Al-Qaeda hit list. Nazir is a man who reassuringly makes all the right enemies. But today you are good friends, I think. For those of you who aren't familiar with his work, I really would recommend his recently published memoir called Prosecutor, which details his pursuit of justice for the voiceless and the ignored, perhaps most notably the victims of the Rochdale grooming gangs who he brought to justice whilst serving as Chief Crown Prosecutor for the North West. But I'll leave it to Nazir to introduce himself more fully. I'll just simply say that it's an absolute honour to have such an outstanding public servant with us today to deliver the Bradlaugh Lecture. So please do give a warm welcome to Nazir Afzal.
Delighted to be here. I mean, in-person events are extremely rare. I've been to a couple in the last few weeks and months, and they're exhausting actually, because we've lost the ability to have them. But nonetheless, I'm absolutely delighted to be here to join you, Stephen, and colleagues, to be able to deliver the Bradlaugh Lecture. I didn't know anything about Bradlaugh until Stephen enlightened me, and I am honoured to be able to deliver this annual lecture, and to you here in my now hometown in Manchester. So firstly, thank you very much for coming out. Absolutely, you said about my enemies, and the New York Times started their profile on me by saying that my enemies are a diverse lot. And yeah, there's a picture of me actually. It's on a dartboard in Tommy Robinson's house. I don't think we're allowed to visit it. I don't think he's allowed to visit it. But as I'm delighted to be able to share a few thoughts with you, I didn't really know what to say, but what I will do is talk a little bit about my journey, if that's okay, and some of the learning that I picked up during the course of the last 3 decades really working in justice. My family came from the northwest frontier of Pakistan, carrying on up the Khyber, all that stuff. Very relevant these days. It's right on the border with Afghanistan. More than 2 million refugees have been there over the last 30 or 40 years. When I hear the Taliban speaking Pashto, I understand what they're saying, and it hits me right here. And I understand that my family took us away, or took my elders away from that part of the world in order to come from the traditional and tribalistic parts of northern Pakistan to the traditional and tribalistic parts of Birmingham, where I was born. And again, I've tried to describe in the book what it was like in the 60s and 70s as an immigrant or son of an immigrant, and the realization that I was born or living within the sight of St Andrews football ground, where it was in football ground. You did not go out on a Saturday afternoon if you valued your life, and I didn't. It's clearly, so I would go out, come back covered in spit, and being abused and God knows what else. I didn't have neighbours, I had witnesses. There was so much crime and criminality, and much of it aimed at because I was different and my family were different. But my home was a very loving environment. It was the safe environment which I've always valued and I've treasured. But the moment you stepped out the door, you realised that you were being treated very differently, not because of anything other than the fact you were different. And some of the language I heard then obviously resonates with me and continues to resonate with people from minority backgrounds 50, 60 years later. There's my age for you. When I left Birmingham after several brutal beatings to study at university in Birmingham, and then I left. I didn't know if I wanted to study law, but those of us from immigrant backgrounds probably remember how much pressure there was on us to become a doctor, an engineer, a scientist. And I remember my father saying to me, that's because at some point they're going to kick us out. And we've got plenty of lawyers back there. We need doctors, engineers, scientists, mechanics. And so I totally understood why that pressure was on me. But, I'd read To Kill a Mockingbird. If you listen to my Desert Island Disc, you know that's the book I chose. Spoiler. I'd read that, lawyers can bring change. I look at people like Richard in this room. You do deliver change. And law is just a tool to deliver change. So I really wanted to become a lawyer. I graduated in law and then initially started off as a defense lawyer in Birmingham, and it wasn't for me. And there's an experience, again, I relay in the book about how I was representing a rape suspect in the days when you didn't have video recording of the suspect, of the victim's evidence. So it was a written statement of what she had experienced. And I'm with him and I'm reading out the statement of the victim, and I realized that he was getting off on it. And I thought, I can't do this. Tremendous respect for, we all need them. We all need somebody to represent us. So tremendous respect for those who can, but it wasn't for me. And I decided then to move to what was then the fledgling prosecution service. It was fledgling, it was 4 years old, hated and detested by everybody, unfunded by the government of the day, and that was in part the problem. The fact that we just didn't have enough funding. Defence community hated us because we'd taken so many of their lawyers and so many of their paralegal staff. The judges and magistrates hated us because they were used to certain people, police generally, prosecuting those cases. Politicians hated us because we lost files. I remember somebody called Keith Vaz, remember him? Confronting me at some event and saying, when I told him I was from the Crown Prosecution Service, lost any files lately? When he lost his Europe minister job, I met him again, I said, lost any jobs lately? Revenge is a sweet kiss, but nonetheless, we had a really awful experience, I think. But for me, it was phenomenal. I was just talking about Stephen about moving to London, as I did in 1999 to join the prosecution service. London was a sea of opportunities, and we didn't have something that we need, but was stifles progress, in my view. That's key performance indicators back then. So nothing was being measured. So Nazir, go to court, do what you want. Learn your trade. If it doesn't go the way you want to go, or you don't get the outcome you want, get better. And I literally was learning on the job. And also, being trusted to do things that were way beyond my pay grade. So I was dealing with cases in the mid-90s as a very junior prosecutor. I used to say baby prosecutor. I never prosecuted any babies. But you know, back in the mid-90s, I was dealing with all these cases that were way beyond my pay grade. Multiple murders, serial killers. I prosecuted the gay slayer he's known as the gay slayer. He murdered 5 gay men in London. You know, these were cases that I shouldn't have had an opportunity to. These days, I would never have the opportunity to touch until I was 20 years trained or something, you know? But I was given that opportunity. And it enabled me to grow very quickly to the point that when I in 2001, when I became assistant chief for London, I was the youngest, can you mean? I was the youngest chief prosecutor grade person in the country. You know, and I was the first Muslim chief prosecutor grade in the country. I was the first, you know, there was lots of firsts, but it was largely because of the opportunities I've been given working in London, understanding, working particularly with the police at that time. Because, you know, I mentioned the people who hated us. People who hated us most were the police, because we'd taken something massive away from them, the ability to charge cases, the ability to run and investigate cases without interference. The reason for the service being set up in the first place was because you'd had the Birmingham 6, the Guildford 4, multiple miscarriages of justice, where there was nobody looking at the evidence before it went to court. And so the idea of a prosecution service independent of police was absolutely key to our existence, but the need for it, everybody saw that the police didn't work. And again, my good fortune, my office was in Victoria. My main court was just a mile or so away. It meant that I walked past what was then New Scotland Yard every day. And this is before more recent security measures. I was able to walk in, have a chat with them. I'd go up to the 9th floor, talk to organised crime officers, and build a relationship with them. Because once they knew that we were actually on the same side, which is delivering justice, then they understand that. And there was a real turning point in about '98 when I was what was called the first contact for the work of the paedophile unit, which was a national unit based in the yard. And I remember we were dealing with a case of you're all over 18 now. I was dealing with a case of 2 parents who sexually abused their children. And on one occasion, on several occasions probably, on one occasion the mother had videoed the father raping the 18-month-old baby. And so building my case, you know, that's my evidence, or a large part of my evidence. You can't go home in the evening and think, I've left my work at home. You just can't. You go home and hug your 18-month-old daughter more than you would have done otherwise, when you realise what others have done to children. And so it became a mission. I realised actually that my job wasn't a job anymore. It was a mission. And so when I got into the role of assistant chief role, it was absolutely important for me to do something different, which was not simply to process cases, which I think was largely what we were expected to do, but actually to deliver justice means engagement. I remember we had first knife crime epidemic in the early 2000s in London. And I remember telling my staff, right, we need to go out and engage with the people most impacted by these crimes. And they said, absolutely, let's invite them to our offices. Guess what? Nobody can. No, I mean, go and talk to them. I remember there's one incident I read in a book where I'm actually above a bookmakers in Harlesden in North London, talking to all these young men wearing bandanas across their faces, comparing knife sizes, my little penknife on the end of my car keys and their machetes. But that 2-hour conversation has never left me. I learned how policing was impacting on why they felt unsafe, the environment, their schooling, everything that was impacting on there. And I went back and I spoke to the Home Office colleagues and said, maybe we should be listening. Leadership is about listening, and perhaps the least valued skill, actually, listening. So there I am, I've come back with all this information, with just more engagement, and the Home Office developed the first serious violent crime strategy based on these conversations. I thought, wow, I've actually brought some change here, And amazingly, when we had the knife crime epidemic a couple of years ago, or began again a couple of years ago, you probably remember the Prime Minister had Theresa May had a COBRA meeting to which I was invited and said, because you know what happened? They just brushed off the serious violent crime strategy from 2003, rebadged it, and said, here we go. I thought, that's not change. That's not change. So anyhow, so I realised that actually I have now some influence and the ability to go beyond just prosecuting, but actually preventing crime happening in the first place, and tackling behaviours perhaps that hadn't been addressed previously. And that, I think, was key, because, you know, again, good fortune that I had, we had money. We had a Blair government who decided to put money into public services in the 2000s, and so I suddenly had budgets, you know, which I never dreamed of. And I was bringing in really talented people, and I was also beginning to have national conferences on subjects that perhaps we'd not touched before. So I organised a conference on airport crime, because Heathrow was in my catchment area in London, and that was about, you know, did you know, I didn't know, that, you know, there were sex slave auctions taking place in Costa Coffee in the airports. Women were being thrown over, and then there would be a little auction involving certain organised crime types. You know, these are things that we just would not have heard of had we not had that conversation and started listening. And I organised a sports crime conference, which, again, because I had Wembley and Twickenham, and I thought, you know, really good opportunity to talk about crimes that might be impacting on sports, including betting, crimes, corruption, but also the behaviours that might be happening. And I remember doing a lot of television interviews. I remember one in particular where I talked about the behaviour of players on the pitch impacting on spectators, impacting on wider society, which I'm sure you all agree does happen, or did happen. But maybe because it was me delivering those messages, or saying those things, I got so much hate mail. I remember one in particular, dear Mr. Afzal, we English invented football, please go back to Rochdale. Yeah? To a globe, and I couldn't find Rochdale anywhere. But I found his name and address on a letter and put it in, and he got a visit from the force. But the point is that I realised, actually, one, when you speak up, that there is potentially going to be a downside to it. And you just referenced the Danish cartoon protest. And I'll jump ahead slightly, because you mentioned it, Stephen. So you had, remember, the Danish cartoon protest in 06 in London, and you had men, invariably men, walking around with banners saying behead this and behead that. Do you remember that? And my then boss was Ken MacDonald, and I remember saying to him, look, you've arrested these guys, or police have, I want to charge some of them with soliciting murder. Not public order, slap on the wrist, out, not even go to prison, you know, fine. I said, what they're doing is soliciting murder. And good for him, he agreed, and we prosecuted, I think, 6 men all in all for soliciting murder. They were convicted of the OBE, they got 6 years in prison. Do you see those banners anymore on the streets? You see how you can bring about change by just simply a legal decision. And of course it was all done, all fair trial. The courts do all that stuff, proper disclosure, everything else, you know, so that everybody gets a fair trial. It's not about not them having a fair trial. It's about selecting the right charge to reflect the level of criminality. But as you said, I got a visit from Special Branch shortly after this, saying, we're here to tell you that we found your name on an Al-Qaeda death list. And I said, oh, thanks. What now? I said, no, that's just our duty, we just have to tell you. So thank you. But, you know, it didn't affect me. It did for a while. I was thinking, you know, what's going to happen? Here I am 15 years later, I'm still here. So the point is that, you know, you sometimes need to speak up without thinking about the consequences maybe for your own personal life, because it doesn't feel real, I guess. What felt real was the outcome of the case and the impact it had on all of us in terms of how we demonstrated protest, which is actually a key right that we all have and should fight for and support. So back in 04, I opened my door and said to victims groups, survivors groups, just keep telling me stuff that I don't know. You know, and a group of women came to me and said, forced marriage is here. Nobody's talking about forced marriage. And so I said, fine, let's organise a conference on forced marriage, honor-based violence, honor-based abuse. And I invited a lot of parliamentarians, and they said, I'm too busy. Here's another trick. Organise a conference in a hotel across the road from the House of Commons. Right? And just give them the time, and they can pop in for 10 minutes, 20 minutes. And it worked a treat. So lots of MPs turned up, listening to the stories of these really brave women, invariably women who were talking about either their own survival experience or who they've dealt with, who they've supported. And it had a massive impact. Because so much so that when we, I remember, first the impact on the day, you know, on that day I did 31 interviews with national and international television and radio, because they were so intrigued by this subject of forced marriage. You know, it never, you know, doesn't happen here. Does it happen here? But there were certain countries that had different views. The French told me that they invented this concept of honour. You know, dueling at dawn, they said. I said, no, dueling at dawn is when you have a gun each, We're not talking about the same thing. The Italians told me Romeo and Juliet, it's all about honor. I said, yeah, maybe so. Yeah, but this is a different kettle of fish. This is about women invariably not being allowed to make their choices. Not being allowed to choose who to marry, if to marry, leaving a marriage, pursuing an education, all of the things that, quite frankly, you and I must take for granted were being denied a sizable chunk of British citizens at that time without any action or recognition even that it was happening in this country. And so the other thing I learned was data is really important. We had none. So I spoke to my police colleagues and I said to them, can you do me a big favour? I've done a few for you, can you do me one? Can you get some people to do a hand sift of all the homicides that took place last year, 630 hands, whatever they were, and see whether or not any of them were honour-based related, because we just didn't know what they were. And they came back, phenomenal team that they were, and said, Nazir, last year, 2004-05, 12 women were killed in the name of honour in this country, that we know of, based on the case. I said, thank you. Well, not thank you, but that gives me information and data. I can then go to government and say, do you know how much it costs to investigate and prosecute a murder? Now it's 1.5 million each. Then it was £1 million. I have to say to them, look, £12 million a year. Never mind your moral case, your emotional case, your legal case. Here's your business case. And so it then meant that we could have, as we did do, develop our first national strategy to tackle this issue. But it was also about understanding what we were dealing with. And people made another assumption. I'm brown, therefore brown people do this kind of stuff. You must know all about it. I've been married 3 times. Not one was forced. Perhaps I should have been. I don't know. But again, and as a man, it wasn't something that I came across at all. But once I started looking at the cases that we were dealing with, had dealt with, I began to understand what we were dealing with. So when Samaira Nazir was murdered by her mother and her brother, her mother held her down whilst her brother strangled her in Leicester, and she was carrying the baby of her boyfriend. That was the reason why she was killed. We dealt with it as a straightforward homicide. But there was something else going on here. And when the mother, I looked at the transcript of the court case, this is ex post facto, this is after the case happened. And her mother was asked, why did your daughter have to die? And she said, it was her destiny. This is something odd. This is not your normal homicide. And so there were more of these. So, and they're all here. Every single name is here because they all have left a mark. So when you got Sajda was murdered on her wedding day in Birmingham by 2 men who just walked into where she was getting married and stabbed her. And then were on a plane out of this country within 8 hours. That's organised crime. That's not just your, heat of the moment stuff. And then when I looked at a family tree, they weren't even on the family tree. These men had felt slighted that she had chosen or was marrying some other guy rather than their own relative. Enough to kill her. It seems really irrational, isn't it? Bizarre, but you have to leave, another lesson, you have to leave rational thought at the door. Because they're doing the irrational things. And if you come in with your rational thought, you're going to block off avenues of investigation, potentially. So there was that, and then Heshi was a 16-year-old girl in West London who was murdered by her father because he discovered that she had a boyfriend. Now, how did he discover she had a boyfriend? The school rang him up and said, your daughter wasn't in school yesterday. Was it anything to do with her boyfriend? I don't blame the school. There was no training, there was no understanding, no recognition, but they executed it. The execution took place because of the information that had been passed unknowingly by an authority figure. So we have to do much more. And so it was important not just simply do a justice-y response here. There had to be a response across agencies, across public sector, and others. I'm really pleased that we were able to bring people together. And it often takes a pivotal case, I think, which really resonates. And I think it was the case of Bernard's Mahmood, which you may have heard about. It was a feature of Honor, the movie, 3-part film last year, with Keely Hawes playing DCI Caroline Good. It's a documentary. If you go on YouTube, Bernard's Love Stories won the International Emmy a few years back. And Bernard's case is, I'll give you a few moments about Bernard's. She was 16 when she was forced to marriage from Iraqi Kurdish family based in South London. She'd been beaten black and blue by her husband. At the age of 18, her family, parents, reluctantly allowed her home. I mean reluctantly, because if they hadn't, she'd been dead at the hands of her husband. And then she's noted and spotted kissing her boyfriend, her first love ever, at the age of 19, outside of Morden Tube Station in South London, by some busybody in the community. That busybody goes back to father and uncle and says, "How dare your daughter kiss somebody in public?" Now, I'm pretty sure most of us, our reaction would be to, he'd be in a grave somewhere. But the point is that this family decided that she had dishonored them. She had shamed their family. And they then, a group of men, including the father and uncle, sat around a table, probably not unlike this one, 8 of them in all, decided that Bernard must die for what she did. And she was abducted off the streets of London. She was taken 100 miles, she was murdered first. She was raped before she was murdered. We know that because we have listening devices in the prison, and they talked about, one of the murderers talked about having raped her and saying, "We raped her because we wanted her to know who was in charge before she died." Not your usual murder. And they buried her in a suitcase 100 miles north. And Caroline Good and her police team did a phenomenal job in identifying the body first off, but also all the perpetrators. And we ultimately, 2 of the men who were responsible for the murder fled this country and went to Iraq. This is post-Saddam. And in 80 years of Iraq's history, we had never ever extradited anybody for anything. But, this is the important thing, we made it very clear to the Iraqi authorities, this is important to us. These 2 men are celebrating the fact that they have somehow restored the honour of their family. Bring them back. And to their credit, they allowed them back. And they were brought back, and they were convicted. And there are 6 men now in prison for life for the murder of a 19-year-old girl for kissing her boyfriend outside the tube station. Irrational, bizarre, but it could have all been avoided if people had done their job. On one occasion, before she was sitting in her living room, and her father walks in wearing marigold gloves, carrying a bottle of whiskey or something, an alcoholic drink. She never drank, and he tries to feed her the alcohol. What do you think he's up to? She manages to break out the window, smashes the window, runs down the street, approaches a woman police officer, smelling alcohol on her breath, seeing blood on her hands, threatens to arrest her for drunken disorderly behaviour. On another occasion, and this is in the documentary, she's in the police station giving her interview about what might happen to her, and presents a list of the 5 men she says will kill her. And the officer then says to the officer, "What now?" The officer says, "We'll get back to you." This is what I mean about not understanding what happens, or what might happen. The risk level, escalates when somebody seeks help. And I often we have something now called first contact. That very often, victims from these communities or people who are at risk of this type of crime will go to the first building that they see as being potentially going to help, the town hall, or a very large building, and they'll go to the person on reception. Does that person, and they go and say, "I'm going to be killed because they want to marry me off," does that person on reception know what to do? Because if you don't, she's going to die. I remember a young woman shares my first name, Samaira Nazir. Again, people make assumptions about this being ignorant, poor people do this. Samaira's family were really wealthy. They owned a large number of properties in West London, including in Cashel County. And she'd been to university at Kingston. She had set up her own recruitment business. You'd think that she was immune from any of this type of behaviour. She fell in love with a refugee. And her mother took her to that person and said to that person, "Would you please," this is 10 a.m. on that April morning, and said to her, "Would you please wash your hands of her and tell her you don't love her?" And he said, "Why can't I do that? I love her." 2 hours later, she was stabbed 18 times in the presence of 2 infant nieces who were splattered with her blood. 2 hours later. You can't say, "Come back tomorrow," to somebody at that type of risk. If we apply our own mindset, our sort of Western way of thinking, however you want to describe it, then all you're doing is putting that person at greater risk by not responding appropriately. And so Benazir's case really brought out a sea change. It led to first ever national police guidelines for tackling honor-based abuse. It led to, I remember, you know those t-shirts you have when you go to a band and you have the tour on the back? Mine would say the Royal College GPs, the Royal College of Midwives, the Coroner Society of Great Britain. I went everywhere telling people. And you know what I did? One, you tell stories like the ones I've just told you, so that people know what they're talking about. And you scare the living daylights out of them. Do you want your organisation to have to deal with this? Because every serious case review is failure, failure, failure. You know, Richard, you know this. The first recommendation in every serious case review about everything is information wasn't shared. It should have been shared. And you hear this thing saying lessons will be learnt, which always makes me. I don't know what it makes you, but I know it makes me. Yeah, because you don't. Because if you did, that wouldn't happen. Yeah, and you don't share information because you hide behind GDPR or data protection or whatever. You think that confidentiality prevents you from sharing information. Actually, the whole principle of information sharing in this safeguarding scenario is to protect the person about whom you have the information, not you, the organisation that holds the information. But that misunderstanding puts so many people at great risk. It was also necessary, wasn't it, to change the laws. So I remember back in 2007, a private member's bill was going through Parliament to legislate about creating forced marriage protection orders. But the government of the day didn't like private members' bills. They carry a cost. And I learned, again, something I learned, was that the cost of bringing in forced marriage protection orders was about £2 million a year. So I sat down with the then Attorney General, Goldsmith, and said to him, if we reduce the number of homicides by 2, that pays for it, doesn't it? And to his credit, he went back and told the Prime Minister Blair, that's what we should do, and the government adopted the bill and it became law. And since 2008, that bill has been in place, more than 3,000 victims have received protection. More than 3,000 lives have been saved. You can't say that about many laws, but more than 3,000 lives. And that model of protection orders now exists for domestic violence, FGM. It exists for so many other spheres of harmful practices, but it was the first we ever did. And then, of course, when Theresa May was Home Secretary, we persuaded her to criminalise, she didn't need much persuading, to criminalise forced marriage itself. And you know, people misunderstood that. People misunderstand what forced marriage is not arranged marriage. My mother and father, God bless them, they were married 50-odd years, and it was an arranged marriage. You know, forced marriage is when you just don't consent. You know, and again, people don't understand that. I even heard the phrase a forced arranged marriage. You're making it up as you go along. But you know where the answers come from? The survivor community and the victims groups, the NGOs who work in this field tirelessly for a pittance. They're your experts. Go and talk to them, and they will tell you what you need to do differently. And that was a really critical point. I think we got to the stage when I was also the US State Department regularly contacted me and said, can you tell us what you've done, what you're doing? You know, how have you got from a situation where you had 12 homicides down to half as many? How, you know, you saved all these lives? I said, well, I shared that experience with them. And for the Americans to think that we're better than them at something, tell us here something. Strangely, that liaison with me stopped in November 2016. I don't know who it was that was elected back then. Didn't want to hear from me, but nonetheless. The point is that the Americans were really keen, the world was looking at us in terms of what best practice was, and that's phenomenal. But we lost a lot of that in the last few years through resources, conversation you can have some other day if you want. But you know, we lost experience, we lost specialisms, we lost the ability to provide that level of support. The NGOs who are my heroes, you know, they work for nothing. They spend 50% of their lives fundraising. Why? When we rely upon them so much, why should they have to spend 50% of their day fundraising when they can be spending 50% of their day, additional 50%, helping people? But we're so topsy-turvy in this country in terms of what we recognise and value. You know, we value merchant bankers. I'll put them right in the room. By giving them multi-millions, we tell somebody who works in an NGO, you know, survive on a 25 grand grant for this year and come back next year and fill in the same forms for the same grant. You know, nonsense, absolutely nonsense. But they're the experts, and they always will be the experts, and you've got to provide them whatever support you can. So once I'd felt that we were in a position now to deal with honour-based abuse and forced marriage in a much better way, it was time for me to move on. And child sexual abuse, I hold all the best gigs. Child sexual abuse reared its ugly head. I dealt with OBE prosecution, which you'll be familiar with, but that was only because the prosecution itself was relatively straightforward, family responsible for the death of OBE. What was more important to me, more interesting to me, was how we as a state, as people, respond to something like that. We do a number of things, 4 things. First thing, when something terrible like that happens, is we want a head to roll. We have such an inherent blame culture. Remember somebody called Ed Balls, whoever he was, told the head of social services she had to resign. And she resigned. The second thing that happens is that we then feel we need to re-engineer the whole process, the risk assessment system. And so we now introduced a brand new tick box risk assessment tool for social workers to apply. And guess what? No tick box saves anybody's life. But we've got this brand spanking new process. The third thing that happens, and happened, was hundreds of social workers left the profession. They didn't want to, what's my experience for if all I have to do is tick boxes? And the fourth thing that happens, perhaps least understood, is in the year after we had this brand spanking new process, we had new leadership, we had more killings of children than ever before. So it worked. That's what we do. Knee-jerk, 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 rather than listening to the experts who might tell you that this is what you should be doing differently. We do. So I moved to the Northwest, I moved here to Manchester in 2011, and I became Chief Prosecutor for what was the new Northwest region. As I said to Stephen, I think part of my thinking was around quality of life. My children were at that time in their early teens. I was leaving from work before they got up. I was coming back after they'd gone to bed. I didn't think that was a quality of life. The Northwest region presented itself as an opportunity, brand spanking new, and I decided I would take on the responsibility as being chief up here. And almost immediately, that summer of 2011 will never leave me, because we had the riots, or disorder. I'm dealing with that. We have 3 homicides, domestic homicides, where the burglars were killed by the owners. Remember those? I dealt with those. At Stepping Hill happened. I was dealing with the Stepping Hill incident, murders, 100,000 other cases, by the way, and then something called grooming cases. And the Times had been carrying out an investigation where they'd been looking at some trials around the country and said something's amiss here, but nobody's doing anything about it. And so I asked my team, do you have anything at your disposal, something you've dealt with that perhaps might, mirror this model that seems to be happening? Let's contextualize. 2/3 of all sexual abuse of children takes place in the family, people you know. The second largest group of victims are online, something we've barely scratched the surface of. Right now, for pennies, you can watch a child being sexually abused in real time somewhere in the world. The third largest group are institutional failings. You know them, places of worship, education, BBC. And the fourth, the smallest, but still tens of thousands of victims, are group grooming of the type, street grooming, that we have had some experience of more recently. And so they brought to me this case in Rochdale, where a group of men, let me rewind. Those of you who've seen BBC film 3 Girls, you see it? I think it's still on the iPlayer. The actor who plays me is much more handsome. I'm always happy with that. But that's based on this particular case. The young girl goes into a takeaway restaurant in 2008. She starts having a row, and she starts breaking things up. Police come and arrest her. At the police station, she discloses that she's been sexually abused by these men. The police carry out a very cursory 11-month investigation, really cursory. They then go to 2 prosecutors who say, well, this is the landscape in 08. Nobody's going to believe her. She comes from a very troubled, chaotic background. No jury's going to believe her, and so the case wasn't proceedable. And now a much better police team and prosecution team have been working on this case, but they have a problem. The problem is a big one. Namely, how do we prosecute this case now, 3 years on, when I'm now here, given that we said that there was no case to answer? How can we turn around to a jury and say, members of the jury, we want you to believe her? Well, we didn't believe her. Quite a big problem. But I said, hang on, there's 2 things we can do here. One, hands up, we got it wrong. She didn't get it wrong, we got it wrong. And they'll go, you find a public authority that says, we got it wrong. It's quite a challenging thing. But anyway, I said, we will say that. And then we can go to the jury and the court and say, we got it wrong. It's not her. Do not blame her or them, the victims. We got it wrong. And that was how we got the case over the line. By simply accepting we got it wrong. Those lawyers in this room will recognize at that time we have a Wednesday unreasonable principle. If it's too unreasonable, that's a reason why you might want to reverse the decision or change it. And to his credit, my then boss, Keir Starmer, what happened to him? He said, absolutely, Nazir, wrong is the word we should be using. And so we were able to reverse that decision. First time I'd done it, we were able to prosecute the case. We had to provide an immense amount of support. The far right were outside of Liverpool Crown Court on a daily basis because they were exploiting the situation as they always do. The perpetrators were British Asian, British Pakistani. The girls that they were aware of were from British white backgrounds. Actually not true, but that's what they believed. And they were taking advantage of that whole scenario, exploiting it. And we got the conviction in May 2012, and then suddenly, this is another reason why, oh my God, Nazir, you're the world's expert now, you've done one of these. And everybody was knocking on my door. Go on to look on May 2012, and all the articles I'm writing for The Guardian at the time, trying to explain to people what's going on. David Cameron, who was then Prime Minister, rang me up and said, Nazir, what's going on? I said, you know about this. Anyway, but the point was, it wasn't about the ethnicity of the perpetrators. That was an issue. Let's not get away from that. It was an issue. The issue was the fact that these vulnerable young girls had been not listened to. That we left them behind. And they're up and down the country, all over the country. They are simply allowed to suffer with impunity. And the perpetrators with impunity are able to harm them. Because the authorities have said, you don't matter. That was the issue. And that is where we needed to bring the change. And so I was doing all of this and trying to explain it and doing interviews on the basis of one case, trying to explain what was going on. And then something happened which even I wasn't ready for. And that was the far right realizing that I damaged their narrative. Their narrative is very straightforward. All British Pakistani men are all the same. Hang on, British Pakistani prosecution. Okay, well, let's deal with that. So they then put stuff on Facebook. The first example of fake news I've been part of, or been involved in, and said Nazir Afzal was the guy that didn't prosecute these guys 3 years previously when I was nowhere near the north of England. But their followers believed that, and so I prosecuted the most serious organised criminals, multiple homicides, really horrible people over these years, and I'd never ever had a demonstration outside of my home. And suddenly, I had these thugs outside of my home, far-right thugs. I had to have a panic alarm placed in my house. The police officer had to teach me and my children how to use the panic alarm. I had 17,000 emails sent to my teams in the course of a few days, calling for me to be sacked and deported. I was born in Birmingham, I don't want to go back there. And they were determined to destroy me. I remember one of my colleagues, my PA at the time, running down the corridor with a letter in her hand. Don't show it to him, don't show it to him. Absolutely, I cannot tell you how proud I am of the people I work with. But they protected me from the harm. And yes, let me remind you, I got every decision right in this case. And that's what happens to you. Because I damaged the narrative of those in the far right. And it remains to this day. I'm not joking when I tell you, when I joked earlier on about Stephen Yassi Lennon and all this, go on YouTube, they say some nasty stuff about me. Based on the lies that they've told and continue to tell. I just round the corner where my office used to be, I was doorstepped by British National Party television. You know that one? I think it's still there on YouTube, BNP TV. Nick Griffin was there, doorsteps me outside to talk to me about who I had, whatever it was. And I was, I went out to have a fag. And I was more concerned about the fact I didn't want my mum to see it. No, I still had a cigarette in my hand. But this was them to try and destroy me for something I had done which was the right thing. But then it was important to do something different going forward. It's not enough to simply, this happened a lot actually, is that you do something good and the circus leaves town and everybody moves on. I wasn't going to let that happen. We had made mistakes as because we recognised. What about all the other mistakes we made? So with my then boss, we set up a national panel of inviting police and prosecutors around the country to send in cases where we got stuff wrong, or they thought we had. And so Barry Bennell was a case, football coach, yeah. So there were plenty of cases that we were reinstated, resurrected in effect, because of that panel and the panel that worked it. And we then began putting national teams of prosecutors who were specialists in this field. We worked with national police chiefs to develop some guidelines. There were 43 sets of guidelines, so there are now one for all the police in the country. We completely re-engineered the process. And then Operation U3 was set up. Savile, people forget Savile was after Rochdale. Yeah? People felt confident coming forward now about what had happened to them. And we have a responsibility to respond to it, to act upon it. It's not enough to listen, you've got to do something about it. You know? And I literally, we changed the way we do everything. And also, it's not just a criminal justice outcome. I remember when I prosecuted Stuart Hall, BBC presenter, he was found guilty of the abuse of 12 women and girls and not guilty of one. And I went to the one he was found not guilty, and I said to her, I'm really sorry that I couldn't give you closure. And she looked me in the eye and she said, Nazir, you gave me closure the moment you believed me. My recovery began the moment you believed me. Never left me. Those words never left. You don't have to think about the outcome. It starts with how you respond to the person in front of you, and what you are listening to, and whether you act upon what it is you listen to. And you know, people say, oh, why are you dealing with these cases? Richard would have heard this from 30 years ago, 40 years ago. Well, I'll tell you why. Her name is Frances Andrade. Frances was a student at Trafficking Music School here in Manchester in the early 80s, and she was being sexually abused by her teacher, Michael Brewer. OBE he was then. Frances had given a story to her friend had approached the police had brought this prosecution. And during the course of the trial, a week after giving evidence, before the jury would return, Frances took her own life. And I remember, the first thing I did was tell the Attorney General, please send out a message to the press, do not report that Frances has passed away, because the jury would have to be discharged, and we would never get this case over the line. And so the Attorney General put a media ban, nobody reported it until the jury came back and convicted him. And then the next thing, again, because I was being lambasted for causing Frances's death. Michael Brewer was responsible for Frances's death. It just took 30 years. You know, people tell you that is murder in slow motion. You know, she was self-harming all her life. It doesn't end with after time is a healer. That one, it does not work. It's not true. Some people can, yes. Most people need support, and some people never ever get over it. And so you've got to recognise that time shouldn't be a barrier to these types of crime. And people again used to beat me up. The Daily Mail called me the witch finder general for running all these witch hunts. Witch hunts. Max Clifford guilty, Mox Will Harris guilty, Stuart Hall. They're not witch hunts if they're convicted on the evidence in a full trial, are they? But nonetheless, I don't mind. Somebody bought me a witch's hat, which I think is probably not right. It's a witch finder's hat. Anyway, but we were able to bring the justice. And 2015, when I left the Crown Prosecution Service, we had the highest conviction rate for the abuse of children in our history. It's gone backwards. And some of you will know, again, I've just touched on resources earlier on. If you lose 21,000 police officers, you lose 500,000 years of policing experience. You lose prosecutors who know what they're talking about. The defence community have been starved of funding. The whole system has been starved. Is it no wonder that we are now suffering the benefits of that? The consequences of that. So I think we've got to, we know what needs to work, and we know we need to make it happen, and we know what we can do. And I was really I'm pleased and delighted and honoured to be part of the massive progress that we brought back then. And it really pains me that I still have to scream and shout about it now, because they're still being abused. Some of you know I'm now the chair of the Catholic Church's new safeguarding agency, first independent chair. There you go. And there's only 2 Catholics on a board of 9, which is a credit. Don't often credit some organisation, and I'm sure you probably don't. But I will credit them for the fact that they put a board in place where, led by a Muslim and with hardly any Catholics on it, to monitor and regulate safeguarding in the Catholic Church. I wish others had thought about that. I can't imagine, to be frank, given what Richard's been talking about the last couple of days with the Exodus report, that any other faith would do that. Put some experts in charge of safeguarding. It's absolutely what you need to do. I don't know how long I've got.
I don't know what.
I suppose I can carry on.
Limits. Okay. 10 minutes.
So I left the service. I've now become the Chief Executive of Police and Crime Commissioners for the country. So I'm trying to bring best practice across all policing. And about a year in, something terrible happened here in Manchester. The arena bombings took place. And I was approached by the media saying, Nazir, could you talk about this subject? Because you are, firstly, you're a Muslim, secondly, you're well regarded allegedly within the Muslim communities, you have some understanding of tackling terrorism, radicalisation, etc. Can you talk about this? And so I went to my board of Police and Crime Commissioners and said, look, I'm going to talk about this. Somebody needs to provide some reassurance or understanding or whatever it is. And my board, by a majority, said no. And so I quit. I walked out the door and decided that I would, what was more important was trying to provide some context and understanding about what was happening. And then it was necessary for me to work on extremism and radicalisation to the point where I became a commissioner for Google. Google started funding small projects that were tackling radicalisation. Everything from a boxing club to the Oxford Open University doing some major work. I was doing some of that. And also bringing in a challenge. It's not enough for me to simply change the law or change practice. You've got to change cultures. And I often say this about, I'm a very strong believer in multiculturalism, whatever that means. But I think what it means for me is in just having diversity and diverse thinking and diverse minds. That's what it means. Do you really think, hand on heart, that Grenfell would have happened if the people who lived in Grenfell were part of the decision making about what cladding should go on the building? Ignore them. We know best. That's why you have diversity of thinking. You have people in the room who have a variety of views. Some you agree with, some you don't agree with. And I've tried to ensure that in every conversation I have, it's also about challenge. Nobody ever called me a wallflower. There were so many occasions. I remember one in particular in a northern town. I'm in a room with 300 men. It's White Ribbon Day. Those of you who are familiar with White Ribbon Day, it's a day when male allies stand up against violence against women and girls. And there were 300 men in the room, and I was there, the Chief Constable was there, and the Chief Executive of the local authority was there. And before I spoke, I noticed there was a tea break, and I noticed that the people there, the bulk of them wanted selfies. And what struck me was they were there because they wanted to be seen to be there. So when I stood up and I said to them, 1 in 4 of you have beaten your wives. Please stand up. They realised actually this is what we need to talk about. 1 in 4 women suffer domestic abuse. 1 in 5 suffer sexual assault. 97% of women in the most recent survey said they were sexually harassed. I think the other 3% didn't know that they had been. The point is, that's the pandemic that will outlive this pandemic. And so you have to have those difficult conversations with people who don't want to have those conversations. I remember talking to another local authority, again up north, and there was a table up front who were literally hissing when I was challenging some of the practices that were happening in the community around FGM or forced marriage. And I realized afterwards, 290 great people, table of 10 at the front. Afterwards, I was told that was the local councillors. That's what we're up against. Is that people with all the wrong reasons take on these positions of power. That's what they see. They're positions of power. They feel that they're now something important, special. And then the last thing they want to do is to rock the boat or to say something that might offend, quote unquote, people within their communities. But actually, when people said to me, the Times reported that Nazir Afzal, why do you have a stick to beat your own communities with the things for the things they do? I said, if we didn't do that, if we should have our own stick, we should beat our own communities up to solve these problems up ourselves, so we don't have the state doing it for us. We need to ensure that we challenge in every environment. And it might mean that you end up on a death list or just simply be ignored, but I'm big enough to take that. And it's important that and there's also something about networks. Resilience comes from the people around you providing you with support when you have those difficult conversations, which they shouldn't be difficult, but they are. When I was, just before COVID, I was doing some international rule of law work in Pakistan. So I was there pretty much every month for a week. I'd go for a week, I don't know how I did it, and come back, and I was training judges and politicians and others in the human rights, because every culture should be based on human rights first and foremost. And so I was having this conversation, and they were listening, and I was thinking, actually, they're more open here than back there, back here. They're more open in Pakistan, Islamabad, or Peshawar, Lahore, than they were in certain parts of this country. And I think, what's going on? I found this picture of the members of my family from the 70s, or community from the 70s, looking like they were from Starsky and Hutchison. Yeah? And not one of them would look like that anymore. Something has changed in the way that they have approached lives, and how they've literally become something that I don't recognize anymore. You're going to hear it from me. They will hear it from me. I'm glad that they invite me to come and talk to them and tell them what I don't like. And I'll stand, somebody said to me, they said, I feel very strong because you're with me. I feel, a chief constable invited me, said to me, they said, come along and talk I need to talk to this place of worship. Will you come with me? I said, do you want me to talk about? And I said, no, just hold my hand. And then, it's crazy, but people lack confidence. They lack the ability to engage perhaps beyond the usual suspects. And that's where I have a problem as well, in community leaders. Anybody in this room know who the community leader is? Why then does every agency and authority want to meet the community leaders? Because they're lazy. Because the alternative would be to go to a school, a wedding, a funeral, anywhere where people congregate and have proper conversations with proper people talking about the real issues that are impacting upon them. The things that really matter to them are education, work. The things that matter to all of us are shared values. Our basic shared values. But no, I will invite a community leader to talk to me about this subject. And I've wasted plenty of time in my life talking to community leaders who lead nobody. So we've got to be cleverer, we've got to be we've got to support each other when we go to various environments where perhaps it's out of the ordinary. We've got to listen to the experts, which, as I said, are the victims, survivors. Back in, some of you know, in April last year, I lost my brother to COVID. And he died at home. He died at home 3 weeks after the government stopped testing in the community. There was no place for him in hospital. And he must have died alone and, really, I can't even begin to tell you what it must have felt like. But then we couldn't bury him for 9 months. Because the coroners were drowning in it. And so, again, when somebody else is going up and down the country to Durham, checking his eyesight, it was really important for me to challenge that. Because I wasn't the only person that lost somebody. I wasn't the only person that couldn't bury or mourn. Most of us who've lost somebody haven't been able to mourn that person that we've lost over the last 18 months. Therefore, we need to challenge those people who somehow feel that's not important. And that goes back to my main point about what's our shared values. Tolerance is a shared value, but not to the point where you harm somebody and allow people to harm somebody. Too often people in agencies have said to me, oh, it's too difficult, Nazir. It's only too difficult because you haven't tried. It's only too difficult because you're quite lazy. Go and engage, go and listen to the people most impacted by these types of behaviors and tell me that you don't feel energized to do something about it. And then if you want to do something about it, go and seek some help from others who work with you to do this. And it doesn't matter to me, quite frankly, what people think of me. I don't care. I will stand by anybody that stands up against the voices of intolerance and hate. I think it's really important that we recognize we're in a bad place right now. Honestly, I was brought up on what we now call the Nolan principles. They are principles of integrity, and honesty, and transparency. It's a legal phrase. What the fuck happened to them? this is my basic point, is that I don't care what people do as long as they're honest and tell us what they've done. And that we challenge them when they're being dishonest. We are owed that. We're owed that. I started my journey 25, 30 years ago, my justice journey, 25, 30 years ago, when I was at an event, and I noticed this woman, it was a forced marriage event, I noticed this woman had her wedding ring, not on this finger, but on the opposite finger of her hand. And I said to her, why are you wearing your wedding ring on the wrong finger? And she said, because they beat me and forced me to marry the wrong man. And I said, and I looked at her, she has a life of hopelessness, of despair, of daily rape, of everything, all potentially extinguished. And yet that was the only way that she could protest. So I made it my responsibility, as it is your responsibility, to be her voice. Thank you very much.